The joke slipped out of him the way tired smiles sometimes do, light and careless, meant to lift a heavy afternoon, and it landed in the quiet like a dropped glass. In that instant, the single dad realized how fragile his sense of normal had become, how one harmless laugh could open a door he wasn't ready to walk through. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the late sun painting dust motes gold, and his heart did something strange, paused, then pounded, as if it recognized a turning point before his mind did. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet bravery of ordinary people trying to do right by their families, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Michael Carter had learned to survive on small jokes and steady routines. In a modest town outside Columbus, Ohio, he balanced work at a local insurance office with the needs of his 8-year-old son, Noah, whose laughter could still fill a room even on days when Michael felt hollowed out. Since the accident 3 years earlier, life had narrowed into practical lines. School drop-offs, grocery lists, bedtime prayers whispered into a pillow with cartoon astronauts. Love had become something he carried like a photograph in his wallet, cherished and untouched. He told himself he was fine with that. He told himself many things. On Thursdays, Michael volunteered at the community center, helping organize donated books and tutor kids whose parents worked late shifts. It wasn't heroic, but it felt like something good. That's where he met Grace Holloway, a woman with attentive eyes and a patience that softened sharp corners. She managed the after-school program with a calm efficiency that made chaos feel temporary. Grace laughed easily, not loudly, and when she listened, she leaned in like the world mattered. Michael noticed these things without letting them mean anything. He was careful. Like that. The afternoon of the joke arrived on a day that already felt heavy. Noah had a science project due, the office printer had jammed twice, and Michael's phone buzzed with a reminder for a parent-teacher meeting he'd nearly forgotten. At the center, volunteers teased one another as they stacked boxes, and for a moment, Michael let himself join the rhythm. He made a passing remark, something self-deprecating and harmless, about asking Grace out if she ever wanted to escape the fluorescent lights and grating sheets. It was meant to be a laugh, a way to say thank you without saying anything real. Grace's smile didn't vanish, but it shifted, like a cloud passing over sun. She asked a simple question then, about age, about where he was in life. There was no accusation in it, no flirtation either, just curiosity, honest and unadorned. Michael felt the freeze hit him from the inside out. He realized how long it had been since he'd thought about himself as someone who could be asked that question. He realized he had assumed too much, or perhaps too little, about the lines between people. Grace was an adult, clearly so, but younger than him by a stretch that suddenly mattered in a way it hadn't a moment earlier. The years he carried weren't just numbers, they were bedtime routines and grief anniversaries, scraped knees and quiet kitchen nights. He saw his reflection in the glass cabinet and didn't recognize the man who joked. For the rest of the afternoon, he moved through tasks with careful politeness, his thoughts looping back to that pause, that sense of crossing an invisible boundary. At home, Noah chattered about planets while Michael stirred pasta and nodded, present in body, elsewhere in mind. He tucked his son in and lingered longer than usual, listening to the rhythm of breathing that anchored him to now. Later, alone on the couch, Michael replayed the day with an unkind precision. He wondered if he'd embarrassed Grace, if he'd embarrassed himself, if wanting something warm and simple had become a kind of betrayal, to his past, to his child, to the promise he'd made to be enough on his own. The next week at the center, Michael arrived early and stayed busy. He avoided eye contact without meaning to. Grace noticed, of course. She always noticed. But she didn't press. Instead, she gave him space that felt both respectful and instructive. Watching her shepherd kids through homework with gentle firmness, Michael felt a familiar ache twist into something else, a resolve he hadn't practiced in years. It took a rainy evening and a missed bus for the shift to begin. Michael ended up driving Grace home along wet streets that reflected neon and taillights. They talked about the program, about Noah's science project, about the way towns like theirs seemed small until you lived inside them. The age question returned, not as a threat but as a reminder of honesty owed. Grace spoke about her life with clarity, graduate school plans, responsibilities, boundaries she kept because she'd learned their value. There was no rush in her voice, no expectation. Michael shared his truth without drama. He talked about being a father first, about grief that still surprised him, about fear that came disguised as humor. He didn't ask for absolution or permission. He simply named the ground he stood on. Something in the car shifted then, not into romance but into respect. The rain eased. They sat a moment longer than necessary, both aware of the significance of not forcing a next step. Weeks passed. The center buzzed with preparations for a fall fundraiser. Michael and Grace worked side by side with a steadiness that felt earned. The joke became a memory with softened edges. In its place grew a quieter understanding. Michael found himself lighter at home, more patient with Noah's questions, more present in the evenings. He started running again, short loops that cleared his head. He learned that wanting connection didn't mean neglecting responsibility. It meant modeling courage. When the fundraiser arrived, families filled the gym, and laughter echoed off the walls. Michael watched Noah explain his science project to Grace with solemn pride, and his chest tightened with gratitude. He saw Grace kneel to Noah's level, meeting him with the seriousness children deserve. In that moment, Michael understood that love didn't begin with jokes or grand gestures. It began with showing up well again and again, and letting others see you as you are. Near the end of the night, after chairs were folded and floors swept, Michael thanked Grace for her patience, for asking a question that mattered. He didn't frame it as regret. He framed it as growth. Grace smiled, the kind that holds both warmth and wisdom, and told him that timing isn't about clocks but about readiness. They agreed to keep things simple, to start with coffee after a Saturday shift, to let life be what it would be without shortcuts. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that healing can be gentle and that boundaries can be bridges, please like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us these stories matter. Before the ending, here's a special request. Please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. On a crisp Sunday morning, Michael walked Noah to the park, leaves crunching underfoot. He felt something he hadn't in a long time, a sense of forward motion that didn't erase the past but honored it. He understood now that the freeze he'd felt wasn't failure, it was a pause for integrity. In choosing honesty over impulse, patience over performance, he'd given himself permission to grow. And in a world that often rushes us past our better instincts, that choice was its own quiet miracle.